Love, grace, humility will win. And then you tell everybody to go to hell.
Stephen A. Smith watched Stephanie White's pregame press conference before Tuesday's game against the New York Liberty and called it what it was, a tantrum.
I stand by them. I will always stand by them. Everybody else can go to hell.
Not a coach addressing her team's preparation. Not a coach talking about the Liberty's defensive scheme or how Indiana was going to attack Breanna Stewart. A 2.5-minute speech about herself, about the online narratives, about who she is, about her relationships with players, about love and grace and humility, delivered to a room full of reporters while her own fan base was booing her outside the arena. Stephen A. did not hold back.
There are folks in Indiana at a home game booing you. You ain't the road team, you the home team, you the home coach, and they booing you.
And he is not alone. The Indiana Lieutenant Governor called for her firing, Dave Portnoy called for her firing, Linda Cohn called for her firing, and while all of that was happening, Caitlin Clark was quietly breaking 6 WNBA records in the game that followed. The coach made herself the story, the player made history, and Stephen A. Smith made sure everyone understood the difference. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because what Stephen A. said about Stephanie White is the most significant mainstream media verdict on this coaching situation all season. Start with what White actually said, because the words matter, and the words are right there on the tape.
You know, this isn't necessarily for those people that are in this room. This is more for an online community that's trying to create narratives that simply don't exist. Trying to create a fabrication or distortion of who I am, of what I'm about.
That is a head coach of a professional basketball team. 2 hours before a nationally televised ESPN game against the New York Liberty, addressing her pregame press conference, not to the reporters in the room, but to social media. She is not talking about basketball. She is not talking about the opponent. She is not talking about scheme or preparation or what Indiana needs to do to win. She is responding to an online community. And that decision to use a pregame press conference as a platform for personal reputation management is exactly what Stephen A. Smith called a tantrum. Because a tantrum is what happens when someone cannot separate what is being said about them from what they need to be doing. And what White needed to be doing 2 hours before tip-off was preparing her team to beat the New York Liberty. What she did instead was tell the world who she is and what she is about for 2.5 minutes. Now here is what makes the timing of White's speech so significant. She did not just decide to address the criticism out of nowhere. She was responding to a specific chain of events from the previous week. DeJoni Carrington left Sophie Cunningham bleeding on the floor with a flagrant 2 foul. White went to the post-game podium and said she did not think Carrington intentionally targeted Sophie's neck. The Indiana Lieutenant Governor went on social media and called for White to be fired. Dave Portnoy called for White to be fired. Linda Cohn said there is no coach on planet Earth who would still be employed for supporting opposing players more than their own. And the Fever's own fans booed White before warm-ups in her own building. All of that happened in the 72 hours between the Chicago Sky game and Tuesday's pregame press conference, and White's response to all of it was a 2.5-minute speech that ended with this.
The hate, the fear-mongering, the divisiveness, the stuff that's trying to hijack our league will not win. It won't win. We are united. We are connected. We will not be divided. When they go low, we go high. Love will win. Grace will win. Humility will win. And kindness will win. I stand by them. I will always stand by them. Everybody else can go to hell.
Everybody else can go to hell. The Indiana Lieutenant Governor is everybody else. Dave Portnoy is everybody else. Linda Cohn is everybody else. The fans who booed her in her own building are everybody else. And Stephen A. Smith, after watching that speech, had something very specific to say about a coach who responds to calls for her firing by telling elected officials and her own fan base to go to hell in a pregame press conference.
With Coach Stephanie White of the Indiana Fever going on a little tirade during a post-game press conference because people were accusing her of not supporting her player after Sophie Cunningham was essentially, knocked upside the damn head by DeJoni Carrington. But it's important that the WNBA wakes up and acknowledges something.
Clark broke 6 records on Tuesday. She is on pace to become the first player in WNBA history Two averaged 20 points and 8 assists per game in a single season. She hit a 28-foot three-pointer over Breanna Stewart to become the fastest player in league history to reach 1,600 career points. She and Mitchell combined to set the record for most points by a duo over an 11-game span in the entire history of this league. 6 records in one game. And the conversation after Tuesday's game was not about any of that. It was about whether Stephanie White's pregame speech was appropriate. That is what Stephen A. means when he says the coach keeps making herself the story. Clark is doing things that have never been done before, and the head coach is using pregame press conferences to address her online critics. Here is what makes all of this even more complicated, because Clark and Sophie both came out after the game and defended White. Clark said she hated that the fans booed her coach, that it made her a little sick, that they are going to ride for White and always have her back. Sophie said the locker room is tight and White loves them, and the outside noise is just noise. The players defended their coach after a speech that Stephen A. called a tantrum, after a week where their coach defended the player who left Sophie bleeding on the floor, after everything this season has produced, the clipboard incident, the trade rumors, the missing challenges, the locker room speeches that skipped Clark's name after historic nights, the players are still defending their coach, and Indiana still won 106-92. That result, winning by 14 on 6 records and a pregame tantrum, is the most Indiana fever thing that has happened all season. This team has been navigating organizational chaos since April. Trade rumors to the Sparks, Lynn Dunn's weed out panel, Alyssa Thomas's throat punch, Sophie getting bloodied by Carrington, a technical foul rescinded hours before tip-off that would have suspended Clark for this exact game, and through all of it, they keep winning. White told everybody else to go to hell, and Indiana scored 106 points. Clark broke 6 records and said she hated hearing her own fans boo her coach. Mitchell scored 28, Boston added 19. And the Liberty, who had won 8 of their last 9 games, went home with a 14-point loss. Stephen A. Smith said it was a tantrum. He is not wrong that a pregame press conference is not the place for a coach to address her social media critics. He is not wrong that Clark making history while her coach makes headlines about herself is a problem, but he is also watching the same scoreboard everyone else is watching, and that scoreboard keeps saying the same thing regardless of what happens in the press conference room. Indiana wins, Clark makes history, and the coach at the center of every controversy this season is somehow still standing, with her players publicly defending her and her team sitting first in the Eastern Conference at 21-12. Whether that is a credit to White's relationships with her players, or a testament to Clark and Sophie's character, or simply the result of 3 players talented enough to win in spite of everything around them, is the question that defines this entire season. Stephen A. called it a tantrum. Clark called it something she rides for. The scoreboard called it 106-92. And 6 WNBA records called it the most historic night of the season. What do you think? Was Stephanie White's pregame speech a tantrum, or exactly what this team needed to hear? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because Indiana hosts the Dallas Wings on Friday, and this team is not stopping. We will see you in the next one.